He had driven past 3 hotels before stopping at that one. Later, when people asked why he chose it, Donovan Cale would say it was the rain, that the storm had grown bad enough that another mile felt impossible. But that wasn't the truth, and somewhere beneath the numbness that had settled over him in the past 4 months, he knew it. He hadn't chosen the hotel. He had simply stopped running. The place was called the Harlow Inn. It sat between a shuttered hardware store and a laundromat whose neon sign buzzed with a flicker that matched the uneasy rhythm of his own chest. Small, tired-looking, nothing like the hotels he usually stayed in, the ones with valets and marble lobbies and staff trained never to make eye contact unless invited to. This was the kind of place where the carpet held the memory of 1,000 ordinary lives, and the front desk lamp cast yellow light that made everything look slightly warmer than it was. He pushed through the door and the rain came with him, briefly, before the door swung shut behind him. She looked up from the desk. She was young, maybe mid-20s, wearing a navy cardigan that was slightly too large for her frame, the sleeves pushed up past her wrists. Her hair was damp at the ends, as if she had come in from the same storm. She wasn't the kind of pretty that stopped rooms. She was the kind of pretty that you noticed slowly, the way you notice the quality of light in a place only after you had been sitting in it for a while. She smiled, the kind of smile people give when they are doing their best and know it. "Good evening. Do you have a reservation?" Donovan stood still. The question was simple. Everything was simple now, in the way that all things become simple once they stop mattering. "I think so," he said. "I called this afternoon." She turned to the screen, fingers moving across the keyboard with a patience that suggested she had made peace with the outdated system long ago. "Under what name?" He told her, Donovan Cale. She found it without difficulty. "Room 114, she said. "Ground floor, king bed. You requested quiet side of the building." He had no memory of requesting that. He had no memory of making the call at all. He had done it the way he had done most things recently. Automatically, from a distance, as if watching himself move through the world from somewhere slightly above his own body. She handed him the key card. Their fingers didn't quite touch. He noticed anyway. "Is there anything else I can get for you?" she asked. He almost said no. The word was already forming. Then he stopped, just for a moment, looking at her, not at her face exactly, but at the steadiness of her. The way she sat behind that desk as if she belonged exactly where she was, as if the world was not unreliable and cruel, but simply a place where you showed up and did what needed doing. He couldn't remember the last time he had felt that. "No," he said, "thank you." He walked toward the hallway, got about 10 steps before he stopped. He didn't know why. His feet simply refused to continue. He stood with his back to the lobby and stared at the fire exit sign at the end of the corridor, its red glow reflecting off the linoleum floor, and he thought about his daughter's birthday, which had been 3 weeks ago, which he had missed. He thought about the voicemail his sister had left him that he had listened to 4 times without calling back. He thought about the investor meeting scheduled for Monday that he had canceled without explanation, and the one before that, and the one before that. Then he turned and went outside. Not through the front. Through the side door, the one near the vending machines, that opened onto a narrow concrete courtyard with 2 iron benches and a dogwood tree that had long since gone bare. He sat down on the bench nearest the wall. The rain came straight down, steady and cold. He didn't open his jacket, didn't pull his collar up. He just sat. He wasn't sure how long he had been there when he became aware that he was being watched. He didn't look up right away. There was a window that faced the courtyard from the lobby area, and through it, barely visible through the smear of rain on the glass, he could see the shape of someone standing at the desk, looking out. He looked away first. What was her name? He hadn't caught it. There had been a name tag, but he hadn't read it. He noticed things like that lately, the small data points he used to collect automatically, names, faces, the details that made people real to him. He had stopped collecting them. Easier that way. Easier not to let things be real. The rain thickened. He didn't move. At some point, the lobby light shifted, as if she had stepped away from the window. He felt something then that he couldn't immediately name. Small, like the removal of a hand that had been resting very lightly on your shoulder without your noticing. He went inside at midnight. The room was clean and unremarkable and quiet in the way he had requested. He sat on the edge of the bed. He did not turn on the television. He did not open the small bottle of water on the nightstand, or pull back the comforter, or take off his shoes. He just sat, in his wet jacket, in the dark, looking at the floor. He had not planned beyond this room. That was the truth of it. Donovan Cale, who had built Meridian Health Systems from a second-hand office and a borrowed server rack into one of the most talked-about biotech platforms in the country, who had appeared on the covers of 3 business magazines and been profiled in the Times, who had a daughter he loved more than he had ever loved anything, had simply stopped planning past this room. He had been carrying it for 4 months, since the morning his company's flagship product, a remote monitoring device for post-cardiac patients, had failed during a patient's overnight care. The failure was not in Meridian's core technology. The investigation later confirmed this. It was in a third-party sensor module, buried 6 layers deep in a supply chain that should have been audited more rigorously. Should have been. He had been told 3 separate times that the audit schedule was behind. He had approved delays each time. He had been focused on the launch. The patient's name was Arthur Pell. He was 61. He had 2 grandchildren and a woodworking hobby and a wife named Dottie, who had held his hand in the hospital room every day of his recovery before the device failed. The press did not care about supply chain audits. The press cared about the CEO's face on the front page with the word negligence beneath it. Donovan had stepped down within a week. His board had advised it. His lawyers had advised it. He had agreed not because he believed he had no defense, but because Arthur Pell was dead and someone needed to carry that, and it was going to be him. He insisted on it. What he had not anticipated was how thoroughly carrying it would hollow him out. He had stopped sleeping within the first month, stopped eating properly within the second. By the 3rd month, his sister Renata had flown in from Denver, taken one look at him, and cried quietly in his kitchen while pretending to make coffee. He had tried to reassure her. The words had come out sounding like a man reciting from a script he did not believe. He had come to this town, this inn, this bench in the rain, with no luggage that amounted to anything. A single overnight bag, his wallet, his phone, which he had turned face down in his jacket pocket and left there. He had not planned past this room. He was still sitting on the edge of the bed at 2 in the morning when he heard a sound near the door, soft, almost nothing, the particular hush of paper sliding across the floor. He looked down. A folded piece of paper lay on the linoleum just inside the door, small, torn carefully from a notepad, the kind kept at the front desk for guests who needed to leave messages. He did not move for a long moment. Then he reached down and picked it up. The handwriting was unhurried, undecorated, like someone who wrote the way they spoke, without performance. You don't have to carry the whole night by yourself. Tomorrow is allowed to exist. No name, no explanation. He read it again, then again. He did not cry. He had not cried in 4 months, not at the press conference, not at Arthur Pell's memorial, where he had sat in the back row uninvited, not when his daughter had asked him on a video call why he looked so tired, and he had told her he was fine. He sat on the edge of that bed for another hour with the piece of paper in his hand. Then, somewhere around 3 in the morning, he lay back on the comforter without removing his shoes and closed his eyes. He slept. Not well, not long, but he slept. In the morning, he checked out before 6. The woman at the desk, a different one, older, barely awake, processed his departure without looking up. He walked to his car in the pale gray of early morning, set the overnight bag in the trunk, and drove. He drove for 2 hours before pulling over on the shoulder of a county highway. He took out the piece of paper and read it one more time, then placed it in the front zippered pocket of his bag. Then he called Renata. It was the first call he had answered in weeks that wasn't from a lawyer. He didn't tell her everything, but he told her enough. He told her he was sorry. She cried again, less quietly this time. He listened without rushing her. Then he went back. Not to Meridian, not yet. First, he hired an independent investigative firm to reconstruct the full chain of decisions around the sensor audit. He had done this partly before, under his legal team's guidance, but this time there were no lawyers in the room, no one managing the narrative, just him and the data and the timeline and every decision that had been made, including his own. It took 6 weeks. The findings were what he had suspected. the failure traced to a component subcontractor 3 levels removed from Meridian's direct contracts, a firmware flaw that had passed through 2 separate quality checks, neither of which had been flagged internally. Donovan's own delays of the audit schedule had been a factor, not the cause, but a factor. He accepted this with the same evenness he had accepted the rest of it. He went to see Dottie Pell himself. He did not send a representative. He did not bring a lawyer. He drove to the house in Allentown, a gray colonial with a small garden that had been carefully put to bed for winter, and he knocked on the door. She let him in. They talked for 3 hours. He answered every question she asked. He did not deflect and he did not qualify, and when she told him that she was angry, he said, "You are right to be." He went back 4 more times over the following 3 months. He helped her navigate the settlement process, not because his lawyers advised it, but because it was the only concrete thing he knew how to do. He returned to Meridian 8 months after the night at the Harlow Inn. The board was relieved. The company had been limping without him. They expected him to come back in his old mode, aggressive, fast, always pushing toward the next thing. He came back differently, more deliberate. He restructured the quality assurance protocols first, before touching any product roadmap. He brought in an independent patient safety board. He delayed 2 launches that he privately believed were ready because he needed to be certain before certain, and the only person whose definition of certain he trusted anymore was Arthur Pell's. He did not forget the note. He had found her name through the hotel manager, who had been hesitant until Donovan explained, simply and without embellishment, what the note had meant to him. The manager had said, "Oh," in a way that meant she understood, and had given him the name. Brienne Shepherd. She was 26. She had been filling in that night for a friend. She worked 3 jobs, he learned, through a staffing agency that placed her in short-term service roles because she was trying to finish a degree in public health at the community college, and the tuition was not waiting for her to be ready. He did not contact her immediately. He sat with the fact of her name for 2 months, the way you sit with a debt you don't yet know how to repay without making the other person uncomfortable. Then his company launched a community health fellowship, a paid 2-year position for candidates pursuing degrees in healthcare-adjacent fields who demonstrated both academic commitment and real-world service experience. The fellowship had been his idea, but the program director had built it, and the selection committee was entirely independent. Brienne Shepherd's application came through the public submission portal. She had applied on her own, had not known that the man who now ran the fellowship's parent company had ever spent a night in a small hotel where she once filled in at the front desk. She was selected on merit. The committee's notes said she had the highest combined score they had given in the pilot round. He was in the building the morning she arrived for her first day. He had not planned to be. He had a site visit scheduled in Baltimore that he'd rescheduled. He told himself it was because of a board call. He knew it wasn't. He was standing near the elevator when she came through the main entrance. She looked the same. The cardigan was different, gray this time, but the same slightly too large fit, the same rolled sleeves, the same quality of unhurried steadiness. She was looking at the building directory, lips moving slightly as she read, and there was something so unguarded about it that he had to look away for a moment to collect himself. His program coordinator introduced them as she passed through the executive floor. Donovan Cale, CEO of Meridian Health System. Brienne Shepherd looked at him the way you look at someone your brain is trying to place in a different context, like running into a neighbor at a grocery store across town. She said, "I don't think we've met." He said, "I don't think we have. Welcome to Meridian." He let her go. She had orientation. He had a board call, and the moment was not one he wanted to rush or make strange. He waited. He did not engineer their next meeting. It happened the way things happen when 2 people occupy the same building and both arrive early and value a cup of coffee in silence before the day starts. She was in the small kitchen off the 2nd-floor atrium 3 days later, standing at the window with a mug held in both hands, looking out at the street. He poured himself coffee. She turned and said, "Good morning," and then said, "I'm sorry, I was just looking at that billboard. Does that mean anything to you?" She pointed. He looked. It was an advertisement for a car dealership. Nothing unusual. He said, "Not particularly." She said, Me neither. I just thought maybe it was something local." He laughed. She looked startled for a second, then smiled. It was the first time he had laughed without it being an act. They talked for 11 minutes before the day pulled them in separate directions. He counted. He didn't mean to count. He was a man who noticed things. Over the following weeks, he learned that she took her coffee with exactly 1 sugar and preferred the window seat in the atrium because the light was better for reading. That she kept a small notebook in her cardigan pocket and wrote in it during lunch, not journaling. She told him once, just thinking on paper, that she had grown up in eastern Pennsylvania in a house with a broken furnace that her father had refused to fix for 2 winters because he was convinced he could do it himself. She told the story without bitterness. It had simply been the weather of her childhood, and she had dressed accordingly. He learned that she was the kind of person who noticed the unnoticed. She remembered the name of the security guard on the late shift. She left a note on a colleague's desk when that colleague had done something well. Not an email, a note, handwritten, specific. She pushed back in meetings when she thought the data was being read too hopefully. Politely, firmly. She didn't need to be right. She needed the work to be honest. He recognized something in that. He did not tell her about the hotel for 3 months. It was not a decision, exactly. More an awareness that some things change when you name them, and he wanted to be sure he understood what this was before he said anything that would require her to respond to it before she was ready. He told her on a Tuesday in October. They had stayed late to review site data from the company's first mobile clinic deployment in a rural county 2 hours north. Everyone else had gone home. The rain had come back, the same kind of rain, unreasonable and total, that drummed against the windows of a different building in a different town. He said, "I need to tell you something, and I want you to know before I say it that it doesn't change anything about your position here, or what I think of your work, or what I hope this professional relationship continues to be. It's just something I've been carrying, and I think it belongs to you more than it belongs to me." She had gone very still. He told her about the Harlow Inn, the bench, the rain, the overnight bag packed for a final night. He told her about Arthur Pell and the 4 months of hollowing out, and the moment he had looked at the note and something had interrupted the silence in his mind, the particular kind of silence that isn't peaceful but final. He told her he had slept that night, first time in weeks. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I almost didn't do it. I stood at the desk for probably 20 minutes arguing with myself." "What changed your mind?" he asked. She looked at the rain on the window. "You looked like you needed someone to believe you'd still be here in the morning," she said, "and I kept thinking, what if no one else does that tonight? So I did." He nodded. She said, "I didn't know if it mattered." "It did," he said, "more than I can properly tell you." They sat quietly for a while with that between them. He did not push past it. He drove her home because the rain was bad and she had taken the bus that morning. He kept the conversation light. He asked about her thesis proposal. She told him about a study on healthcare navigation barriers in rural communities, and he listened with genuine interest, and when he pulled up in front of her building, he said, "I'll see you Thursday, for the clinic debrief." She said, "Thursday, good night, Mr. Cale." He said, "Donovan." She smiled and got out of the car and went inside. He sat there for a minute before pulling back into traffic. The something that had been growing quietly between them was not a question he needed answered immediately. He was a man who had learned, in the hardest way available, the cost of moving faster than the thing you were building could support. He had learned to trust the structure more than the timeline. She was in the middle of something, a fellowship, a thesis, a version of herself she was in the process of finishing the construction of. He had seen that in her from the beginning, the focused, deliberate way she moved through her work, as if she knew that the foundation had to be solid before anything could be built on top of it. He did not get in the way of that. He showed up, to the debrief on Thursday and the next site review and the meeting in February where she presented her preliminary findings to a room of people twice her age and held her ground on every challenge with a precision that made him proud in a way he had no formal right to be. He left a note on her desk after that one. No signature. Just, "That was excellent work. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." She knew it was from him. She didn't say anything. but the next morning there was a cup of coffee on his desk, made the way he took it, which she had quietly learned, and a small sticky note that said, "Thank you for being in the room." Time passed the way it does when you're not running from it. Brienne completed her fellowship. The thesis she defended in the spring on healthcare access disparities in rural counties became the basis for a state grant proposal that eventually landed funding for 12 new community health liaisons across 3 counties. It was her work, her framework, her name on the abstract. Donovan had written a letter of support when asked, and that was the extent of his involvement. At her completion ceremony, held in the building's atrium with folding chairs and grocery store sheet cake and genuine warmth, he sat 3 rows back, not at the front. He had not reserved a seat, he had simply come. She found him afterward in the small crowd. She said, "You didn't have to come." "I know," he said. She looked at him the way she had looked at the window that first morning in the kitchen, thoughtful and unhurried. Then she said, "Are you free on Sunday?" He said he was. She took him to a diner in the neighborhood where she had grown up, 40 minutes outside the city, a place with vinyl booths and laminated menus and coffee that had been sitting too long. She ordered eggs and toast with a confidence that said she had been ordering this exact meal at this exact counter since she was small. He ordered the same thing, and it was the best meal he'd had in a year. She showed him the street where she had walked to school, the library where she had spent most of 2 winters because the house had been cold, the community center where a volunteer nurse had once checked her blood pressure during a free clinic and talked to her for 20 minutes about what the numbers meant, and Brienne had gone home and thought, "That's what I want to do. Make things make sense to people." He listened. He asked questions only when he had them. He did not try to give the day more weight than it already carried. Walking back to his car, she said, "You're different from what I expected." "What did you expect?" he asked. She considered. "More polished," she said, "like you were performing something." He thought about that, then said, "I was for a long time." She nodded as if that answered something she had been quietly turning over. They drove back into the city through the last of the afternoon light. At her building she got out and then paused with the door open, looking back at him. "I found that note," she said, "the one you left on my desk after the presentation. I still have it." He said nothing. She said, "You've been doing that the whole time, showing up quietly." He looked at her. "I learned it from someone," he said. She held his gaze for a moment, then she smiled, small and real, and closed the door. He watched her go inside before pulling back into traffic. That night, he took the piece of paper from the front zippered pocket of the bag he had carried into the Harlow Inn, transferred now to the small box he kept in his desk at home, the one that held his daughter's first drawing, and a photograph of his parents, and 3 other things he needed to know were safe. He unfolded it carefully. The crease lines were soft with handling now, the paper slightly warm. "You don't have to carry the whole night by yourself. Tomorrow is allowed to exist." He held it for a moment. Then he put it back, folded with care, in the place where he kept the things that had kept him. On a Sunday 2 months later, walking along the river path south of the city while the early November air came in clean and cold off the water, Brienne slipped her hand into his. No announcement, no preface. She simply reached over as they walked, the way you reach for something that has been there long enough that reaching for it feels like the most natural thing in the world. He held on. They walked without talking for a while, the city quiet around them, the river doing what rivers do, moving forward without making a point of it. And for the first time in a long time, Donovan Cale did not need to know what came next. He was here. The morning had come again and again and again, and that, it turned out, was enough to build almost anything on. "I keep thinking about the bag. 1 overnight bag. No return ticket. That's what Donovan carried into the Harlow Inn that night, and for a long time after reading this story, that detail was the one I couldn't put down. Because it wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a movie moment. It was just a man who had quietly stopped making plans past a single room, and nobody around him had noticed yet. What stopped him wasn't a grand intervention. It was a piece of notepad paper, 11 words from a girl, working someone else's shift, who almost talked herself out of it, who stood at a desk for 20 minutes arguing with her own instincts, before she finally crouched down and slid that note under the door. That's the part that gets me every time. She almost didn't do it. And I think about all the times I almost didn't do something small, almost didn't say the thing, almost didn't send the message, almost let the moment pass because I told myself it probably wouldn't matter, or it wasn't my place, or the other person wouldn't want to hear it from someone like me. I think about how many times I chose the easier silence, and I wonder what was on the other side of that door. Donovan did everything right, and then something outside his control went wrong, and the weight of it nearly crushed him, not because he was weak, but because he had enough conscience to feel the full gravity of it. That's not a character flaw. That's what integrity actually costs sometimes. The people who feel nothing when things go wrong aren't the responsible ones. They're just the ones who've learned to look away. What he did next is what I keep coming back to. He didn't wait for the investigation to clear his name before he went to see Dottie Pell. He didn't send a representative. He drove himself to that gray colonial in Allentown and knocked on the door and sat there for 3 hours and answered every question she had. Not because it was legally strategic, because it was the right thing, and he knew it, and he did it anyway, even when it cost him something. That's what real moral courage looks like, I think. Not the big speeches. The part where you show up in person when you could have sent a letter. And Brienne. I think about what it took for her to build what she built, 3 jobs, night classes, a thesis on healthcare access, the whole long, unglamorous road of it, while the man she had once quietly saved was rebuilding something too, in parallel, neither of them knowing the other was still at it. There's something in that I find genuinely moving. The way 2 people can be in the middle of becoming something, separately, honestly, without anyone watching, and the work is real precisely because no one is watching. She didn't wait for permission to be capable. She just kept showing up, kept thinking carefully, kept doing the honest thing even in rooms full of people who had more credentials and more confidence and more history in those chairs than she did. That's not luck. That's the quiet, relentless kind of strength that doesn't photograph well but holds everything up. What Donovan and Brienne both understood, eventually, is that you can't build anything lasting on borrowed time or borrowed worth. You have to actually do the work, carry the weight yourself, and trust that becoming whole on your own terms is the only foundation that doesn't crack under the first real pressure. I think that's the thing the story is really about. Not the romance, not the note, not even the second chance. It's about what happens when 2 people decide, separately and seriously, to become the kind of person they can live with. And then they find each other again, not in need, but in choice. That's a different kind of love story, and honestly, it's the only kind I believe in anymore.